Today, we're gonna walk through my process for making a hip hop and trap beat in Ableton Live. So right now I've been putting together a beat pack to send out to other producers and artists, and this is a beat that I've made to go in that beat pack. It's a really good example of the different ways that I go about producing hip hop. So generally I start with some sort of loop or some sort of melodic element. I know some people like to start with the drums. I generally start with the vibe. So in this specific situation, I started with this guitar loop. So what we got going on there is we have RC20 adding a lot of warble, distorting it just a little bit and adding a little bit of noise in there, vinyl tape noise. And then as you can see, I have two instances of Kickstarter right here, and both of those are set to two different kicks because in this beat I have a verse section kit and a heavier section kick that comes in a little bit later. So then after I have that established, I generally go to the drums. So I start with my kick and snare patterns. So I came up with this. We'll go through these individually first. I have this rim sound, which actually originally sounds a little different than that. That's the original sound. And then what I've done is I've warped it. I've put it in beats mode, preserved the transients, started from the beginning, and then turned it down. So as you'll notice, as you turn down this number right here under transients, it'll actually shorten what it's preserving and it'll cut out the rest. I didn't want all that extra tail, so I cut it all the way down. And if you cut it all the way down to 0, it sounds like a nice little tick. So I wanted to get a little bit more space off than that. I think that gave it a really nice rim knock sound. And then I paired that with this snare drum, which doesn't have any processing on it. And I offset it forward by 7 milliseconds. And the way that you do this in Ableton is you actually go down here in this bottom right corner of your window, and there's this D section down here, that's delay. And you can actually delay your tracks negatively or positively, so you can push your tracks before the beat slightly or after the beat slightly. So I have it set up to where the snare is hitting 7 milliseconds after the beat, technically. So if I were to zero that out, this is what that would sound like with the rim knock, which is fine. But then I wanted it to be a little more offset to give it a little more of a lax feel. They just offset ever so slightly, and it just does something really nice to the snare. And then the kick is just this kick sample. After that kick sample, I added some hi-hats, and I actually went in and played these hi-hats. And I actually played these in by hand, then went in and edited a couple of the note drops. I wanted them to have a little bit more motion. In full, that sounds like this. Then I added a little crash on the downbeat, just to give it a little starting note. And then I went through and added some percussion bits. So I'm using this first one as a lead-in to the snare hit. And then the second one I'm using to actually elongate the snare a little bit, kind of accent the snare. Make it feel like it's exploding a little bit, but only from the right side. And then these other ones I'm using to also kind of do a snare lead in. So, and then those just repeat. And before we move on to the next section, I want to actually go backwards to this intro. Let me show you what this sounds like, and then I'll show you how I did it. So that sounds really awesome, and I actually took a little bit to get that exactly right. In the back half of the guitar loop that we aren't using in the verse, but we do use in the chorus, there's a secondary section. And I really liked how that sounded, so I wanted to use that for the intro to kind of lead into the verse. Since it wasn't going to be in the verse, we can kind of allude to it for later. I have the same RC20 processing as the main guitar loop, except I've used this other high cut mode, and I've actually brought down the fader to where it's cutting off a good bit of the highs, and it's making it sound a lot darker and a lot older. And that way, when it comes into the actual verse, it's brighter and it feels like it kind of opens up into something. And then for this reverse pad, I actually use something that's new to Ableton Live 11, and that's called Spectral Time. It is a delay kind of plugin and with a freeze button on the plugin. So it allows you to freeze certain sections and it'll continuously loop it and turn it into almost a pad-like thing. So what I did was, before I darkened the intro, I grabbed a small section, made a new track, set it to resampling, and then I added Spectral Time on the guitar loop and then froze it at the exact right time that made this really cool pad. Then I grabbed that, cut that up, and actually reversed it. And now that is my new riser into the verse, using the same guitar as already in the intro. Don't be afraid to mess around using things like Spectral Time to freeze different tracks and make pads out of stuff, and grab stuff, chop it up, reverse it, down pitch it, see what it sounds like, and it could be really cool. You come up with really interesting things just like that. So for the second half of this verse section, I wanted to add a little bit more. So I added a flute and I added a bass. So firstly, I'll show you the bass, and that's made using Anna 2, which is a great plugin from Sonic Academy. I use a tweaked version of this Mafia preset that I have. I believe I either got this from Make Pop Music or the Slate Digital bundle, but I really like the fact that it's this really nice, smooth bass. I'll solo it out and play it for you real quick. I wanted to have a little bit of a slide in to that next note. You can kind of hear halfway through, it does a little ooh into the one. If you ever need to do this in a pinch, this is really nice. What I did was I opened up the MIDI section here on the bottom. I go to the envelopes section, drop that down, go to where it says MIDI control and select the pitch bend from the secondary option. And right here, I just added a little pitch bend to where it drops it down. And it leads right into the next section really, really nicely. The other thing I did was I added a little bit of a flute. You always think about, like, in Westerns, you have like that doo-woo-woo that feels like very fluty and airy. I wanted to kind of do something to replicate that. So I got this one shot of a flute from one of Make Pop Music's free pop boxes. And I dropped it into Simpler, added a little bit of Pro Q, scooped out all the lows, and took out a little bit of the super, super harsh high end, and then added this instance of Valhalla Vintage. Once again, cut out some highs. The lows were fine on that, and I wanted it pretty long. Really nice, airy, ambient sounding flute. And that ended up sounding like this. Sounds a little bit reminiscent of like Zelda or something like that to me, but I really like it. I think it's really cool. And in context, it sounds really awesome. It sounds like this. So that's our first section. For the second section, I wanted to make it a little more aggressive, a little harder hitting. So I'm gonna let you listen to it and then I'll kind of go through exactly what I changed between the two areas. So in this next section, what I did was I changed the soft hi-hat that we were using in the verse from doing the majority of the work to just keeping a nice quarter note rhythm the whole time and then jumping occasionally into an eighth note rhythm. What is doing a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the hi-hats go is the loop that I have right here, and these paired together work really, really well. So that first hi-hat really kind of anchors in that beat and that groove, and it lets the other hi-hat be a little more wild. We didn't really do anything to the guitar loop. That's pretty much the same. This is just where that second instance of kickstart comes in and switches from being the first verse kick to this harder, heavier hitting kick. So that first verse obviously sounds like this. That's the first kick. And then the second kick, we changed the kick and also made it a more busy pattern. A very explosive kick. I wanted to feel like it's your speakers busting out. And then compare that to the verse. Really, we have the kick and that bass that we made. Whereas in the chorus, we have this second kick and this 808. Now for this 808, I'm using Sublab. Unless I have a specific 808 that I really, really like, sometimes I'll use Simpler or Sampler or something like that for my 808s, but the majority of the time, Sublab is my go-to for 808 samples. And I would suggest if you're getting into hip hop and trap beat making, this is like a go-to for you, in my opinion. You have really nice filters, really great distortion, really great compression, and just some really awesome synth, sample, and X-sub sounds that you can kind of blend together to make super unique instances of subs and 808s. I used a slightly different crash this time in this section. A little brighter crash, a little more abrasive since we're kind of upping the energy here. And I used this really nice whoosh and hit transition from a pack that I bought off of Splice for trailer transitions. It sounds really cool though. It's really great and really impactful. Has a really great tail to it, and it really helps transition between that verse section to the more energetic section. I did a cut and let the whoosh kind of carry it in. So it sounds like this, that transition. And it just gives a little push into that next section, brings up the energy a little bit, almost instantly. And then one of the other things I did was I added a clap instead of a rim knock. So whereas in the verse, we had this combination, now in this chorus section, we have a clap snare combination. It sounds like this. And then at the end, I just did a longer version of the flute section, whereas in the verse, it just did the first, it just did this first section. Now in the chorus, we're actually finishing that idea and finishing that phrase. So here's what that sounds like. And here's the whole beat in its entirety. So I think what a lot of hip hop and trap production comes down to is a lot of your sample choices. I have a really large sample library when it comes to this genre. And I think that going on things like Splice and going and checking online to your favorite producers or some of your favorite artists, weird combinations of sounds, that's what's going to make a really interesting track. The other thing is really great kick and sub marrying. So making sure that those things will really sync well together, because you want those to hit hard. And a lot of trap music and hip hop music is very reliant on that kick punching through everything and being really the anchor. And then probably the most important factor is having a really great groove. Finding that pocket and making sure that you don't do anything to really interrupt the groove, that you feel like somebody could really rap over this. So if this has been super interesting to you and you want to learn more, I actually have another video right here all about producing in Ableton Live, and shows you how to use samples, how to use MIDI, how to use different instruments, where to put all that stuff. And I think you're going to really enjoy it, so you should check that one out.